Let's talk about Intel. And more specifically, the question is this. What the hell is wrong with Intel's processors? From a technical standpoint, and based on the information we have so far, there are two distinct problems. The first one applies only to high-end 13th generation processors and involves the oxidation of communication paths between the processor layers. This is a classic manufacturing issue, and the 13th generation Intel processors are neither the first nor the only to face this defect. Given the precision required for the layers inside processors, even a slight deviation can cause inadequate insulation between layers. Corrosion of the communication paths inside the processors leads to premature aging, instability, and eventually complete failure. This problem was identified and isolated by Intel last year, so apparently it's no big deal. If your processor was affected, you send it for RMA and got a new one. However, the real problem, from my point of view, it's not technical, but communicational. More precisely, Intel did not communicate when they found out about the problem and preferred to stay silent, quietly replacing processors as they failed. This happens when shareholders are valued more than customers. Without communication on this subject, no waves were made in the market, but customers suffered more, because each had to diagnose their PC without necessarily having a clear idea of what was causing the system's instability. Even now, in the second half of 2024, Intel does not communicate which processors are affected, which series, what manufacturing date, although I am sure they have all this information. Even though the oxidation problem has been resolved through replacement, it is still unacceptable for a company of this caliber. Yet, the second problem makes the 13th generation oxidation issue seem trivial. For more than a year, users of high-end Intel processors, especially 13700K NKF, 14700K, 13900K KF and KS, 14900K KF and KS, have reported instability in certain applications or games, such as those using the Unreal 5 engine. The errors were very diverse, including a video memory insufficient error. The issue was that errors with insufficient memory appeared even on systems with an RTX 4090, which has 24 gigs of VRAM. Home users diagnosed their computers as best they could, drawing varied conclusions, from faulty memory to software problems, from the graphics card to the processor. In reality, based on the information we have now, the problem was a complex one and primarily related to the processor. The contributing factors are as follows. 1. Unlike AMD, Nvidia, and any other sensible manufacturer, Intel did not mandate partners, meaning motherboard manufacturers such as Asus, Gigabyte, MSI, to adhere to strict power limits for processor power supply, limits that would add a margin of safety regarding reliability. Instead, Intel issued recommendations that could be, and were, violated by motherboard manufacturers. When competing with neighboring motherboard manufacturers integrating the same chipset with the same processors, it's natural to use any trick to get ahead in performance, and higher power limits did just that, providing a performance boost. This wouldn't have been a problem if the processors themselves were built and programmed correctly. To simplify, regardless of the available power from the motherboard, the processor has a voltage table, known as VID, which tells the motherboard the necessary current and voltage based on load and frequencies. But from the available information, it seems that for some high-end processors, the VID includes values that are unsafe for the processor. Essentially, the processor says, for 6 GHz I need, say, 1.55 volts, and the motherboard with violated limits says, here's 1.55. The problem is that 1.55 volts is too much for these processors in certain contexts. This leads to progressive physical degradation of the processor through a phenomenon called electron migration. In short, excessive voltage degrades the processor's paths, increasing their resistance, making the processor need more and more voltage to remain stable at a given frequency. If the process continues, the processor ends up unstable at default settings, even under light loads, at which point the CPU is essentially dead. Diagnosing this problem is difficult for home users, and conclusions are reached late, when the processor is already significantly degraded. This is why the media storm is happening now, when retail processors are falling en masse. Remember, the problem doesn't manifest immediately, and degradation is usually gradual. However, one thing infuriates me greatly. The magnitude of the problem has long been clear to Intel, which supplies millions of high-end processors for servers alongside those for individual users. It was recently discovered that the failure rate in these servers was between 25% and nearly 50%, a terrible percentage that should have raised many alarm bells at Intel. Given that a normal failure rate should be around a maximum of 5%, even a 25% rate should have been a clear sign of a severe issue. But Intel seems to live in another world. Even though they had the failure rate figures since last year and knew there was a serious problem, they chose again, as with the oxidation issue, to resolve returns with large clients behind the scenes without communicating anything to home users or those with small volumes. In my opinion, this is an absolutely criminal attitude in the strictest sense of the word. Now, let's move on to the next question. What's the solution? After nights of swapping memory, rebuilding systems from scratch, we found a set of solutions that proved effective in eliminating the problem. For the more technical audience, for the 14900K, we limited the available power for the processor to 253 watt for PL1, 280 for PL2, limited the available current to 350 amps for 14900K, 320 for 14700K, and configured the motherboard so that if the processor asks for more than 1.5 volts for a specific frequency, the motherboard says, "I don't have it." The result was, first of all, that temperatures on the 14900K no longer exceeded 90 degrees, and performance was not affected as much as in the panic solutions that motherboard manufacturers came up with. Overall, we're talking about a maximum of 5% performance drop, but with much better temperatures, which is a big win in my opinion. And now a question for you. Would you prefer 5% more performance and the risk of being without your PC while the warranty is resolved, or slightly lower performance and a cooler, more reliable processor over time? And no, I'm not saying the second option is better, because it's not fair to buy a product declared to be at a certain performance level only to have to lower it even slightly to be safe. So, you have two options. Either continue running the processors as before and replace them at Intel's expense when they fail, or apply these limits at least until Intel comes up with a clearer solution. Returning to the elephant in the room, Intel, in the 11th hour, has finally admitted the problems and announced they will release a microcode update in mid-August to be included in new BIOS versions to eliminate the risk of degradation. However, for already deteriorated processors, this update will only delay the inevitable, or at best, stop further degradation. I believe the fault lies entirely with Intel for the despicable way they chose to hide the problem, and I hope this behavior will be heavily penalized by users. Regardless of how good the solution provided by that microcode update is, the essence of the problem lies not in the technical mistake, but in the intention to hide it. And now let's also discuss a bit the financial side. Last Friday, Intel shares dropped to their lowest point in the past 10 years after a series of disastrous announcements. Profit figures below estimates for the second quarter, triggering the suspension of dividends, the layoff of approximately 15,000 people, over 15% of the total number of employees, and even worse forecasts for the second half of the year. The drop in Intel's stock on Friday was the largest recorded by the company since 1974, causing a market value depreciation of over $30 billion. Besides consumers, even investors seem to have lost faith in Intel. For the first time, Intel's future is genuinely on the edge. But what I want you all to understand is that this video is not some hate shower against Intel. I sincerely hope Intel proves me wrong in a year or two and comes out with good products. I also genuinely hope Intel doesn't abandon the ARC graphics cards and that this division doesn't become a victim of Intel's cost cuts and layoffs. We need Intel for both processors and graphics cards to ensure a diverse and competitive market against AMD and Nvidia. So Intel should put its shit together and quick. And on the principle of better late than never, the first step in this direction is admitting their own mistakes. We'll end this video here and await your opinions in the comments below. What do you think about the problems Intel has been going through for several years? And lastly, do you think Intel will triumph over adversity or is heading rapidly and somewhat deservedly towards bankruptcy? I've spoken bluntly because all these damages are undoubtedly self-inflicted. Trust is ultimately the most precious asset of a company, and in Intel's case, it was evident on the stock market how much it matters. So, it's a warning to all those who choose profit over consumers and short-term shortcuts over honesty. Subscribe here to our small channel. Thank you anyway, whether you do it or not, and wish you good luck.